Hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar What's Coming in Windows Server vNext with Jeff Woolsey. I hope I pronounced the name correctly because I'm not really sure, Jeff. We are on first name basis. Jeff will introduce himself very soon. So I'm very happy to have you here on your first work day in the new year. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing really well, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And yeah, it's I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday. I hope everyone was able to end 2023 in a joyous and happy way, hopefully surrounded with friends and family. And because we got a busy 2024, we got a lot coming down the pike, and I'm really excited to talk to you about what we're working on for Windows Server vNext.
Yeah. So before you start with your presentation, and I'm very looking forward to it. Let me do two announcements. First, if our viewers have questions, please type them in the chat wherever you are watching. We are streaming live to StreamYard, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. So just type your questions. I hope we will get it. And when we have time, we will I will ask the question, Jeff. If you are shy to type them in English, that's okay. Type them in German and I will translate them. And I will do another short thing because Jeff is here for an hour. Jeff has a hard cut at 8 6 p.m. German time or 10 a.m. Redmond time. I will look a bit that we are on point and finish the webinar on point, but maybe we have some time for questions afterwards. Um, Manfred and I, we do a whole 2-day conference about Windows Server vNext with all the new stuff that is coming. You can go to the website Windows Server Summit DE with dashes between it, and we have an early bird running. So if you want to learn all about the new version, and maybe we have a surprise speaker there, we will never know. Um, so um, just register and be there, and there will be much more information than we can cover in 1 hour. And I understand, Jeff, and we are going back to your screen. I understand you can't talk today about everything that is coming in vNext, but you can talk about a lot. So now we will go to your screen and you can start your presentation. And first, maybe some words. Jeff, who are you? Uh, where, for whom are you working and what are you doing?
So thank you for your nice intro, Carson. Yes, I'm Jeff Woolsey. I'm a principal PM manager at Microsoft. I've been here over 20 years. I work on a variety of technologies, working across our hybrid space, so Windows Server, Azure Stack HCI. I work on storage, Hyper-V, compute, all of these things. But hybrid is where I live, and hybrid encompasses on premises. And let me be super clear. When we talk about the Microsoft strategy, it is about cloud, it is about on-prem, and it is about hybrid. So I will be talking about all of those things today. And as Karsten mentioned, I can talk about a bunch of things in Windows Server vNext. I can't talk about everything because we haven't released all the information about vNext yet. But trust me, there's plenty of goodness, so we're going to dive right in. And by the way, you are going to hear me call it Windows Server v.next. I know a lot of people think they know what the name of the next version is or what it could be. We have a pretty obvious pattern that we follow, but it hasn't been announced yet, and it still could change. So I'm going to keep calling it Windows Server v.next. That is the version after Windows Server 2022. So let me talk about the agenda a little bit. In today's session, really, I wanted to talk about, number one, what is your top request? I want to make sure we are nailing what has been the top customer request from the last release, Windows Server 2020. What is it that everybody said, I got to have this feature? We have a bunch of innovation going on in Active Directory, next generation Active Directory, next generation that we're doing with the SMB file servers, the SMB protocol. I want to talk about mission critical data and storage. There's a lot of changes that have been going on in the storage world, and Windows Server has just a massive amount of changes in terms of performance, in terms of scale, lots to come there. Hyper-V and AI, come on. You think I'm going to have a session and not talk about Hyper-V and AI? Yeah, we're absolutely going to have a conversation about that. Of course, we're continuing all the work that we've been doing on containers. So there's a lot of new innovation around container flexibility. I'm also going to drop to probably what your number 2 request is. Don't know if it's number 2 or number 3, but it's another top request. And then finally, want to end off today with talking about kind of what the modern server experience looks like. So with that, let's dive right in. And the first thing I want to say is that we are really at a point where we're preparing for the next LTSE, long-term servicing release for takeoff. And that's what Windows Server vNext is about. So let's start with, one of the things that we're seeing a huge traction with 2022, and that's mission critical, and that's hot patching. If you look today at the Xbox team delivers mission critical online services, period. And when I mean mission critical, I mean 1,000 servers running 18 different services, each service running between 2 and 120 SQL servers. This isn't some little tiny departmental farm. We're talking planetary scale, folks. And some of these workloads have been running for over 15 years. Okay, started way back on, Xbox One, and and we just continue this on because those servers are expected to continue to run so everybody can play games. These workloads used to be all on physical, then they moved to virtual, then they moved to Azure VMs. So these services are running in Azure virtual machines. Now, before hot patching, they would have to service these, just like everybody else does. Okay, so to service Windows Server running all of these SQL servers, 3 weeks every month, they would roll out updates, and they would do it without downtime. So there's orchestration, there's automation, they plan for it 12 times a year. Now it meant 3 weeks out of every month, they're basically working on updating and patching. This is before hot patching. With Windows Server 2022 hot patching, they're now able to patch 1,000 servers in less than 48 hours without downtime. Think about that for just a second. They went from 3 weeks every month where all they were doing was patching, again, massive scale out cloud service, to now it takes them less than 48 hours because of hot patching. And by the way, they had to do that 12 times a year before hot patching. With hot patching, they only have to do it 4 times a year. So the time it takes greatly shrunk, and the number of times it takes is greatly shrunk as well. So for those of you who haven't seen hot patching, let me quickly show you, and it's incredible. And hot patching is a way to install updates that doesn't require a reboot and won't interrupt workloads running on your server. And so the way it works is on the right-hand side, I've got a Windows Server Core VM where I'm going to manually install a hot patch update. On the left-hand side, I have a Windows Server Core virtual machine, and I'm going to install a comparable LCU, a latest cumulative update. On each VM at the bottom, you'll notice I've queued up a massive file copies just so I have some workloads that are running. And at the top, there's a timer, so we can track the timing of each patching, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and start off this patch installation on each VM. And in fact, I'm gonna give the one on the left a traditional update. I'm gonna give that a head start. So you can see I've gone over there and I've already installed it. Let's go to the right and I'm gonna do, hot patching is done. Sorry, I feel kind of bad about that. In case you missed it, we've already patched the one on the right. It's done, it's finished. If you blinked, you may have missed it. Really sorry about that. You'll notice, by the way, the file copy continued uninterrupted, no downtime. And you can see on the left-hand side, the traditional LCU is still going. So in case you missed the first hot patch, let's run a second one. So we're gonna go back to the right side, we're gonna run a hot patch, and boom, we're done. So you can see we've just patched the one on the right. There was no disruption to the workload. It was instantaneous. It is patched right now. and there was no reboot required. That's the beauty of a hot patch. One of the greatest advantages of hot patches is that the changes are made in memory immediately. So the one on the left-hand side is still going. It's going to take a little while. So let's go ahead and speed up the video so we can get to the completion of the traditional update. And you can see that right around here at 7 minutes and 12 seconds, it's done, but now a reboot is required. So if I'm to reboot right now, it's going to interrupt my file copy. I don't want to do that. So now I've got to wait for the file copy to finish, let that quiesce and complete. So let's go ahead and speed this up again. And now it's done. And now I can reboot the one on the left. Whereas the one on the right has been done. It's been secure the entire time after we've done the hot patch, and life is good. So as you can imagine, I show that with core VMs, and I'm almost always asked, well, Jeff, that's great, but I've got a bunch that are running server with desktop. No problem. We got hot patching on desktop experiences as well. Now today, hot patching, of course, this requires Windows Server 2022 Azure Edition. Okay, so you can get this in Azure if you're running in an Azure IaaS environment, or if you want to run this on premises, you can get hot patching running on premises if you're running on an Azure property like Azure Stack HCI, Azure Stack Edge, or Azure Stack Hub. Outside of that, hot patching doesn't exist. And it should be pretty obvious now why it's being used by the Xbox team and why they consider it a mission critical service. They love it. They're just crazy excited. And every customer that I run into that's using hot patching now is like, this is game changing. And in fact, this takes us to our first request, which is exactly what customers have told us. They've said, Jeff, hot patching is a game-changing feature. No reboots, no downtime. Please, Microsoft, we are begging, we are pleading. We need hot patching everywhere. I need it on-prem. I need it on physical. I need it in VMware. Heck, I even need it in other clouds. Well, this is what we're delivering in Windows Server vNext. Hot patching for everybody. We're introducing ARC-enabled Windows Server vNext hot patching. So what does that mean? Well, number one, it means everybody gets hot patching. It's ARC-enabled hot patching. That means you can ARC-enable your Windows Server vNext, that's standard or data center edition, not just Azure edition, running on physical, running on virtual, and running on other clouds. And I got to tell you, for physical, you know who's really excited about that? I'm going to go back to SQL for just a second. There are people that still run mission critical SQL directly on bare metal. They're like, I'm not running VMware, I'm not running Hyper-V. This is my mission critical database. It's running directly on the bare metal, period, end of story. I need this hot patching for this environment because this is the most mission critical environment. Done, we got you covered. Now I want to be clear, this is ARC enabled, which means this will enable hot patching via the Azure portal, and there will be a monthly subscription if you're using the ARC enabled hot patching. If you're using hot patching on Azure or Azure Stack, like HCI, Hub, and Edge, like we have today, it's still included at no additional cost. So if you're using Windows Server Azure Edition, you're running on Azure or Azure Stack HCI, for example, two very popular places, then you'll still get hot patching at no additional cost. It's just part of the product because it's an Azure feature. If you need it outside of Azure, we've got you covered with ARC-enabled hot patching. So that's the first top customer request. Next,
Jeff,
yes,
can
Carson.
I ask you a question here?
Absolutely.
Because this is really great, but if I understand it correctly, also physical machines can be hot patched, but we have, of course, to have Windows Server v.next running. It's a feature coming in v.next. So you
Correct.
have to have v.next installed on the physical machine.
Correct.
Then you can hot patch. Okay, great.
This is a feature specifically in Windows Server v.next. This is not Windows Server 2012. This is not 2016. It's not 2019. No. If you want to ARC enable your Windows Server, it's got to be on Windows Server vNext.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You bet. So next, I got to get to another top area that customers are always asking me about, and that's identity. And that's next generation Active Directory. And honestly, I'm really excited about this because there's a bunch of things that we've been very quietly working on that we've been starting to make people aware of, and we've started to do documentation so that our insiders could already start testing and evaluating these. But there's a bunch of really cool new things here, and that starts with things like Active Directory 32K database page sizes. So you may be wondering, what's this all about? I've never even heard of a database page size in Active Directory. Well, hopefully you haven't, but I'm guessing if you're some of our bigger customers, you have. So let me give you a little backstory here. Active Directory goes all the way back to Windows 2000. Well, back in Windows 2000, we're, again, turn of the century, Windows Active Directory uses a database called JetBlue. And the page sizes, the database page sizes we use are 8K. And this is an architectural design decision that was made, again, with Windows 2000. It made a ton of sense. It was Active Directory was new, domains and forests very small. However, back then it wasn't an issue. But as organizations have grown and people are running and hitting their heads on limitations, they're running into scalability limitations around Active Directory scalability limits. In fact, we have a document that even covers this called the Active Directory Maximum Limit its Scalability and Capacity. So, for example, a single record, an AD object, couldn't exceed 8K bytes in size. Now you get much more. So what we're doing essentially is a new domain controller is installed with the 32K page database, and it uses 64-bit long values, but it runs in an 8K page mode. So if there's anything I want you guys to understand is I don't want anybody leaving this webinar going, oh my gosh, Microsoft's about to release a new version of Active Directory. It's going to break everything I have. No, that's not happening. Okay. What we are doing is we are releasing a new version of an updated version of Active Directory with these 32K page sizes in there. But when it's communicating with older, by default, it's going to use the 8K page mode for compatibility. So it's a transparent upgrade. You're not even going to know what's happening. Now, an upgraded domain controller will continue to use the current 8K pages and the 8K database format. If you want to get this new feature, you've got to move to on a forest-wide basis, and all of your domain controllers have to be running Windows Server v.next. So you already should be running at Windows Server 2016 level domain controllers, Active Directory domain level and forest level, right? Everybody, like, shake your head. And if you're not, you're way behind. Okay, it's really important that you take advantage of the latest and greatest, because there's a bunch of work we do for performance, for scale, for security. And you're not going to get this feature unless you move your entire domain and forest to Windows Server v.next. Now, this is just one of our scale and perf improvements. Another one has to do with the actual physical machine, the actual server itself. So again, when we released Active Directory at the dawn of the turn of the century, back in 2000, you have to remember, what did a server look like? A server maybe had a processor or two, or maybe even four, and there was no, multiple cores. It was threading. It was a single thread of execution. It was a different world. I have more horsepower in my desktop machine than we were shipping in servers back then. Okay, so it made sense that from a NUMA perspective, Active Directory only needed to support the first NUMA node in a NUMA topology for a server. However, as servers have gotten larger and larger, we now have servers shipping with 32, 56, 64, 96, 128 cores, and the number continues to rise. Guess what? Active Directory can't take advantage of that many cores. So it actually is limited to the first 64. So one of the changes we're making in vNext is it's now NUMA aware. It's aware of NUMA topology, and it can take full advantage of all the resources in the machine. There's a bunch of work we've done obviously around being able to check out and monitor performance monitoring. So we've updated the Active Directory diagnostics data collector set so that you can measure these, so you can see these changes, and you can see what we're doing from a performance and scale perspective. There's a whole bunch of other changes, and this is a long conversation in and of itself. LDAP support for TLS 1.3, improved security, encryption by default for LDAP, changes to default. There's a ton. I'm not going to go through all of these. But there's a couple I want to highlight. The first one is LDAP support for TLS 1.3. I'm really excited about the work that we did in Windows Server 2022 for TLS 1.3. Okay, it's baked into 2022. It's the latest version of TLS. It's really important to understand something. TLS is one of those kind of unsung heroes that a lot of people don't realize. TLS is transport layer security. You're using it right now. If you're watching this webinar, you're using TLS. If you're checking your mail, if you're doing anything on the internet, you're buying anything, you're communicating, you fire up a browser, you fire up mail, anytime you're on the network, you're using TLS. TLS 1.3 is the latest and greatest. Okay, there's too many people using very, very old and ancient versions. Like TLS 1.0, that's 1999. Okay, TLS 1.1, you want to be on TLS 1.3. We made those investments already in 2022. Now what we're doing is we're also bringing it to LDAP support. So you get TLS 1.3 for LDAP over TLS connections. We've also done some work around hardening Active Directory. A good example is the second one, improved security for confidential attributes. So now, if you are doing any sort of operations like add, search, modify that use confidential attributes, it requires that the connection is encrypted. This used to be an optional feature, but now we're saying, nope, we're hardening this. So those are just a couple of examples. There's a bunch more. We've already made changes to improve cryptographic support. There's a bunch of things going on for Kerberos support for AES with 256 and SHA 384. There's a bunch of things going on here. The important thing to understand is security, security, security across the board, performance and scale. And by the way, there's even more. There's also a feature called Active Directory Replication Priority Boost. And essentially what this is the first time you're setting up a new domain controller and you're doing that replication, that first replication may take a while if you're on a big domain, big forest. So what you can do is you can actually boost the priority to speed that up. Okay, so this boosted replication gives you the ability to just speed up that first process. So AD syncs quicker. Additional hardening we're doing around things like security hardening and mail slots. This is a feature that, quite honestly, this predates even Windows NT. Okay, that's how old we're talking. Mail slots are older than NT. This dates back to LAN Manager. This dates back to DOS. Okay, it's one of those things that nobody's using. Probably no one even cares. When I say we're disabling these, you're probably going, I don't even know what this is. Great. Most likely nobody does. So just want to let you know, it's just part of hardening the platform.
Yeah.
Now we get.
Jeff,
Yes.
can I ask a question from a viewer? I will just show it, but you don't have to read it. In essence, it's about the number of security groups a user can be in. And I don't know if you know that, but this Carl asked, we have a limit of 1,015, and if this is being increased, so I understand it, a user can be in only 1,015 security groups. Huge number. Do you know if there is something happening here? And if not, I think it's not really a problem.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I've been here a long time. I have not heard that question before. So kudos for the question. I do not know if that has changed. That's a great one.
Probably not.
I'll have to chat with some. No, I do not know that off the top of my head. So yeah, sorry, I can't help you on that one. I will tell you, like I said, nobody's ever asked me that question, so it makes me wonder, what are you doing over in Active Directory land that you're hitting that sort of limitation? So anyway.
Okay, thank you. Go on, please, Jeff.
Okay, sure. And so when it comes to Active Directory functional levels, like I mentioned, you want these new features, you got to be running Windows Server vNext for your forest and domain functional levels. A couple things I want to point out is, number one, all these features require the new functional levels, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell everybody right now, just stop your email campaign. No, we're not backporting these features. These are not going to 2022. They're not going to 2019. Just going to stop you right there. This required some major work. Major changes under the hood. This is a Windows Server vNext feature, not a 2022 or 2019. Now, in case of upgrading, like I said, I don't want anybody to be freaking out and going, oh my gosh, Microsoft's going to make a change. It's going to break my AD. No, not at all. This is a transparent change. New AD Force or LDS configuration sets are required to have a functional level of 2016 or greater. So if you're on some sort of ancient version of your domain controllers, like it's on 2012 or 2012 R2 or heaven forbid 2008 R2, you are long past the time where you should be on a newer version for your domain controller. So get to 2016. That will make the ability to jump to Windows Server vNext much, much better. If you want to promote promotion of AD and LDS replica requires that the existing domain be 2016 or greater. Okay, being super transparent, don't want any surprises. And again, if you just introduce a Windows Server vNext domain controller into your domain, it will just continue to work. It will continue to just transparently be there. It will continue to use 8K pages for compatibility. But when you make the move, you're going to get all the new features. One other thing I want to point out, and super proud of the work that a bunch of folks on the team are doing, is this isn't really Active Directory. This is local KDC and IA Curb. So we're talking about Kerberos key distribution now being built into Windows, not just domain controllers, but Kerberos authorization for local user accounts. We want to NTLM, it's way past time for NTLM to go away. We've got to do it in a careful way, in a prescriptive way, and we want to walk you through it together. We want to make sure that everybody continues to all their applications can continue to work and it to be a seamless transition. So we are beginning that journey here, but we want NTLM to go away the way of the dodo bird. So just letting you know, and there's a lot more about this. You can learn more at aka.ms/NTLM. All right, I've spent quite a bit on identity, on authentication. It's time to get to a huge new area, Windows Server vNext storage. So the storage team, when they're thinking about the next release, there's a bunch of pillars they have in mind. And so one of the areas we focused on is, number one, we want to accelerate mission critical workloads. We want to make sure, look, SQL is massive. SQL Server, we know that customers are running it everywhere from the teeniest, tiniest devices to the biggest scale-up databases out there. We've got to make sure that we provide the absolute best storage environment for SQL to thrive. We also know that there have been huge changes in the storage industry. Just look back to 2010 or 2012. You look at storage back then, it's largely SAN and it's disks. Okay, guess what? We're long past that. Okay, now there are plenty of still disk SANs out there. I know that there are people that have them, but guess what? In many cases, they're looking at their storage and they're going, okay, so maybe I'm going to move some workloads to the cloud, so I don't need to worry about storage because the storage goes right up there in the cloud. In some cases, I may have a bunch of workloads that say, you know what, I'm going to move this to a hyper-converged story. I'm going to move this to Azure Stack HCI. Guess what? Azure Stack HCI has local storage, it's flash, it's crazy fast, great. Or I'm going to use storage spaces direct with Windows Server. Guess what? It's flash. However, there's also folks that are saying, you know what? I still do have some SANs, and I still do have some specific requirements for SANs. And guess what? Those are not going to be disk anymore. Everything is flash. Nobody wants, disks are great for archival and backup storage, but everyone is moving to NVMe and flash for better performance, better scalability, and so much more. So we want to optimize for NVMe storage. We want to improve performance. At the same time, we also want to lower CPU utilization. The read-write patterns, the way you interact with storage is changing, or has changed, I should say. When you were dealing with disks, you're dealing with a read-write head that's going across a platter that's spinning very, very fast. Okay, but you're still limited by that. Flash, no, I don't have that limitation. I can read, I can do more concurrency, more parallelism, and guess what? That can drive up CPU. So how can I be as efficient as possible with CPU? Because guess what? I'm running mission critical SQL. I want to have CPU cycles as much as available for that as well. And then of course, reducing storage costs as well. Everybody is cost sensitive. Everybody's always looking at ways to reduce costs. Can we do that? So let's start with accelerating mission critical workloads. I can't even tell you how excited I am about this. So Windows Server vNext delivers 70%. I want to look at that very carefully. 70% more IOPS. Don't believe me? Let me show you. On the left-hand side, I've got Windows Server 2022 at 1.1 million IOPS. This is a single device running a synthetic IO workload with 8 threads with a queue depth of 64. And on the right-hand side, that's right, 1.86 million IOPS. This is tremendous. There's number of benefits here. Number one, you have increased IOPS for your scale-up workloads, for mission critical, done. But at the same time, it also means reduced CPU, which means there's more CPU available for other workloads. Now, again, this is a single device. It's a dual socket. It's an Intel system with a synthetic IO workload, 8 threads, queue depth 64, and the results are measured here using the Windows Performance Monitoring. This change is already in Windows Server vNext Insiders. So if you're one of our insiders, first of all, thank you. We appreciate your support. And if you've been testing this, guess what? You're assuredly already seeing this. Now, this isn't all. You may be thinking, Jeff, what do you mean this isn't all? This is amazing. It is amazing. But in fact, we're actually working on some additional performance optimizations. They're not in the insider builds quite yet, but let me show you. We're about to go from a 70% improvement to, yeah, a 90% improvement. Let me say that again, 90%. So on the left-hand side, again, I've got Windows Server 2022 with 1.1 million IOPS, same test, single device, synthetic IO, 8 threads, queue depth 64. And on the right-hand side, I'm getting 2.1 million IOPS. Take a good look at that. This is a massive performance improvement coming to NVMe storage in Windows Server v.next. And in case you're wondering, wow, this sounds pretty incredible. Should I be concerned about this? Well, guess what? We've actually already been doing this. Spoiler alert, this already exists in Azure. This already is running in Azure. We are delivering insane storage performance in Azure. And guess what? We're delivering those features now on premises in Windows Server v.next. Incredibly excited about this. Now, again, the 70% performance improvement you can take advantage of right now. If you're not in the Insiders program, join the Insiders and you can. This one's coming soon. So what else is happening on the storage side? Well, there's a big change coming. Like I said, we're really focused on NVMe. We're focused on flash storage. And like I said, there are some people who are saying, you know what? I'm good with cloud storage. I'm good with HCI, but you know what? I still have some workloads that require SAN. Guess what? We heard you. We're delivering an NVMe over Fabric TCP initiator. So you're going to get a massive increase in IO performance. We're going to reduce latency for remote storage. One of the things to remember is, again, just fundamental differences between disk and flash. Disk, we've got to deal with a spinning platter and a read-write head. Drives me absolutely crazy to think about it. We've been limited by disk for a long time. Don't get me wrong, it was a great technology in its day, but flash destroys it in terms of performance and scale. Okay, you have to remember, even the fastest 15K hard drive that existed, 15K, lots of spindles, maybe if you were lucky, you got somewhere between 250 and 350 IOPS. 250, not 250,000, 250. I now have, like, my laptop delivers hundreds of thousands of IOPS. Well, the reason this is so important is because, number one, not only did the underlying storage change, but how you communicate with the storage changes. Okay, because now you can do more transactions, you can do more parallel, more concurrency, and it means the way you're communicating with storage needs to change, which is why this NVMe over Fabric TCP initiator is so important. We'll be able to surface remote namespaces, and guess what? We're gonna deliver enabling modern SAN connectivity. So for the folks that are looking at upgrading their SANs, we've got you covered there as well. So local performance, we got you covered. Direct attach, we got you covered. Storage spaces, thin provisioning. Oh, thin provisioning. Guess what? There's a whole bunch of additional storage space enhancements that we have, such as thin provisioning and storage spaces, such as stretch cluster support. Big one, REFS dedupe. REFS native deduplication and compression. I'm very excited about this. So we've had NTFS deduplication and compression. We've had that for some time, which is good for, static cold workloads, for backup, for archival, that kind of thing. But what about for running workloads like virtual desktops, things that are active? REFS deduplication and compression is designed for exactly that. With file servers, you can see I've on average about 60% of storage. For VHDs, ISOs, backups, you can save on the order of about 90% with deduplication. Who doesn't want to reduce their costs of storage by simply checking a checkbox? And then we've also made enhancements to storage replica. There's performance enhancements with the enhanced log. There's compression. Again, there's a whole bunch happening in storage. And lastly, I also have to get to clustering, because we've been working very much on clustering as well. And what we're seeing is, clearly, a lot of people are used to running, clusters in data centers. Got it. But what we're seeing is more and more people want to run clusters at the edge. People are saying, you know what, I really just want to run, if you look at a server, I can buy a server that's not much bigger than like a couple laptops thick with lots of cores, lots of memory, lots of flash storage. If I just cable a couple of those together, I've got 2 or 3 of these, all of a sudden now I can deliver a solution at the edge that's very, very powerful. Well, I want it to be highly available. Okay, so if I want to do that, I need failover clustering. Well, all of a sudden now I got to bring an Active Directory, and wouldn't it be great if you could do failover clustering without Active Directory? So there are cases where people want this at the edge, so we're working on exactly that. AD-less, Active Directory-less clusters. It's going to use certificates, okay? So if you're saying you don't want to deal with Active Directory, well, you still have to have a way to do this in a secure way, so it's going to be certificate-based. You'll stretch clusters, you'll have improved performance, but it is certificate-based, as well as live migration will be certificate-based live migration. So there's a bunch of changes happening in failover clustering, specifically for folks that are working at the edge. All right, so I haven't gotten to it yet, but it is time to get to one of my favorite topics, Hyper-V. So when it comes to Hyper-V, I cannot stress this enough. Hyper-V is a mission critical technology at Microsoft. I'm gonna look directly into the camera. I want to be super clear about this. Hyper-V is a mission critical strategic technology for Microsoft. Don't believe me? Here's where we use it. Hyper-V is robust hardware-based virtualization and isolation. We use it for the Azure hypervisor system. Azure uses it. The Azure Stack family uses it. Hub, HCI, Edge. There's this little thing called Windows. Windows Server uses Hyper-V. Windows Client uses Hyper-V. But it's not just used for virtualization and isolation. It's also used for containers. It's also used for security. If you've ever deployed a container with Hyper-V isolation, guess what? That's Hyper-V under the covers, of course. Platform security, like Credential Guard, Remote Credential Guard, things like that. And by the way, there's this little thing called Xbox. Again, you probably don't even realize it. That's okay. I just want you to understand it's in there, and Hyper-V is absolutely a critical part of this. Now, these are just the things that I can tell you about. These are just the things that I can let you know, publicly. We've stated on many occasions that this is how we use Hyper-V. There are other ways, but we've always looked at Hyper-V as it's more than virtualization. If you look at it's security, it's isolation, it's so much more. And we actually continue to invest and innovate in hypervisor technology for more than just virtual machines. And it's good for everybody. And in case you're wondering, I mentioned Azure Hypervisor System at the very top. In case you're wondering, well, Jeff, come on, what does that mean? Well, here's an example of something that Mark Rusinovich posted. This is a virtual machine in Azure with 1,792 virtual processors. That's right, almost 1,800 virtual processors in a single VM, and it's got 29.7 terabytes of RAM, makes a great Quake server. Just kidding. Anyway, just to show you, our foot is down on the gas pedal. We continue to innovate on the hypervisor. Anybody who tells you that hypervisor innovation is done, maybe it is for them. It certainly isn't for Microsoft. We have our foot down on the gas pedal, which takes us to another and new area of innovation with Hyper-V, and that's Hyper-V and AI. So when you think AI these days, it has a lot of different people, lots of different perspectives on it. I think about it a lot of different ways. I look at how my kids think about it. I look at how my family thinks about it. Um, I have, relatives that will come, Jeff, I hear all this AI. What's going on? I hear I can make pictures with it. I can write stuff with it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that people think about it. And it's this new burgeoning technology that, has the potential to really be a tremendous, tremendous innovation going forward. But from an infrastructure level, from folks that are in the trenches like yourself, and I'm assuming I'm speaking to a bunch of IT pros out there. By the way, you guys are awesome. Thank you for all that you do for your organizations. When you think about infrastructure and you think about AI, that largely means you're thinking about GPUs. Okay, because if you look at what's going on with AI, there's a lot of GPU inferencing, there's ML. If you saw Microsoft Ignite, we had Satya Nadella, our CEO, introduced Jensen from NVIDIA, was on stage. We have lots of investments going on in AI across a lot of different areas of silicon. So before I get into Hyper-V and AI, let me kind of explain to you where we are today, right now, with Windows Server 2022, because not a lot of people realize this. So today, with Windows Server 2022, what's shipping right now, okay, we have this thing called GPU with Discrete Device Assignment, or DDA. What this means is you take a full GPU and you assign it to a VM. Okay, so you say, here's one GPU, you get this one VM, that's it. Okay, there's no sharing. I can't give a GPU to multiple VMs. Nope. Okay, with discrete device assignment, you're saying here's a discrete device and we're assigning it to a virtual machine. Now, this is great for workloads that consume an entire GPU. So if you're doing dev test, or if you've got a workload that just says, no, I want the entire GPU, you're good. Now, there are some limitations. There's no failover clustering. So for example, if I walk up to that server, yank out the power cable, maybe clustering's it. No, you can't cluster this. So there's no HA. There's also no live migration, because again, we've got a hardware dependency and we're actually taking a specific GPU and mapping it into the virtual machine, and there's no sharing. So we're very excited about what we're delivering in vNext. And that starts with Windows Server vNext GPU-P support. And GPU-P stands for GPU partitioning. What this means is you can share a GPU across multiple virtual machines. So what you do is you create a GPU partition, and then you assign each partition to a VM that supports a set of users. This can be done via PowerShell. This can be done through Windows Admin Center, and you get full support for live migration and failover clustering. Let me say that again. You get full support for live migration and failover clustering. So if you have you want to take half a GPU and assign it to one VM, half of GPU and assign it to the other VM, great. Maybe you want to assign it to 8 virtual machines. Okay, let's cut it up into 8 pieces. Maybe you want to cut it up into 16 pieces. You can do that. Now, first question I always get is, people look at this and they go, whoa, this looks amazing. Can I run this on my 10-year-old server? No way. I'm just going to be super clear about this. I don't want anybody coming up to me unhappy with me saying, Jeff, this doesn't run on my server from 2016. Nope. There's some specific requirements around GPU-P. Number one, you have to have SRIOV, which stands for Single Root IO Virtualization. That's a feature of the platform. It needs AMD Milan or later, or Intel Sapphire Rapids or later. Okay, so these do need to be some pretty modern servers here. From a GPU perspective, this is not the entire list. The list will continue to get upgraded, but it's NVIDIA A2, A10, A16, A40. Again, the list continues to grow, so it's almost out of date the moment I put it on a slide, but we have it all documented online. From a HA and live migration, yes, you have both live migration and HA are supported. I also want to point out that when it comes to live migration, you can do it in a clustered environment. You can also do it with standalone servers. So outside of a cluster, so if I've got two separate servers, I can actually live migrate a VM from one to the other and it will work. And by the way, what makes this possible, part of the magic that we're doing is SRIOV. Single root IO virtualization allows you to take a resource and essentially divide it into a data plane and to a control plane. The control plane is mapped to the host, while the data plane is mapped to the guest. That's why we can do GPU-P, and you actually get hardware and live migration. And I would normally do a demo right here, but I don't think that's going to go over very well in this environment. So I'm just gonna actually point out a couple quick things here from a GPU perspective. What does it look like? So here I am in Windows Admin Center, and you'll notice here I've got 4 hosts. Okay, and here is a specific host. You can see that it has not been assigned. There's no assignment for these partitions. So I want to go and configure the partition counts. So I told you I can divide a GPU into maybe 2 or 4 or 8. Well, this is where you go do that. So I'm going to go ahead and select the GPU, and you can see here's my option. I can carve this GPU up into 16 partitions, 8 partitions, 4 partitions, 2, or just a single one and say, guess what? The whole VM gets the entire partition. I'm going to go ahead and select 4. And you can see now I have 4 partitions. I assign it, and there we go. So now I have 4 partitions there for this virtual machine. And now, 4 partitions for this GPU, and then I can assign that partition to my virtual machines. So I go in here, I click on assign partition, I choose my virtual machines that I want to assign GPUs to, and just like that, I assign partitions. So it's very straightforward. You're dicing and slicing resources, you're dicing and slicing partitions, you're assigning them to virtual machines, all done very easily through Windows Admin Center. Click on assign partition, and there we go. So very exciting stuff that we're doing with GPU partitioning. I'm very excited about it. I also want to point out that on the GPU side, we're also doing work on DDA, which I'll get to. Carson, did I see you pop back on? Do you have a question you're about to ask me?
Yes,
Go
I
right
have.
ahead. Go right ahead. I don't want to
So I
switch to the next topic yet.
yeah, I will do it short. So I assume it's not in the insider build yet. It's still to come, right? Or can we just test it when we have all the requirements?
Correct. It is not in the insider build yet. I promise you, when it is, you'll hear all about it. And it's another reason why you want to join the Windows Server Insider
I
program, so
am.
you can hear
I
about it.
am.
I know you
Okay,
are, Carson.
thank you, Jeff.
You bet. You bet. So that's GPU partitioning. Like I mentioned before, 2022 also has this thing called discrete device assignment. I also want to point out that we did work for DDA here as well. So Windows Server vNext includes GPU with DDA hardware support through GPU pools. So GPU pools essentially allow you on every node, you create a PCI resource pool with the same name and add GPUs to the pool. So what you're doing is you're still doing discrete device assignment. There's no SRIOV. You're actually mapping, a virtual machine, a GPU inside of a virtual machine. So you're assigning a VM to a GPU pool instead of an individual GPU. So what this means is if there is a failover event, like someone walks up and accidentally, yanks out the power cable, it will fail over to another node and the GPU will be reassigned to it. Now I want to be clear, this is HA only. This is not live migration. Okay, you're not going to be able to ever live migrate a DDA environment. And the reason why, in case you're wondering, is when it comes to DDA, you're mapping the entire resource inside of the virtual machine. With DDA, the host doesn't even see the GPU. Okay, what ends up happening is when you do discrete device assignment, you're actually mapping the GPU itself inside of the virtual machine. The host no longer sees it, so it no longer even knows it's there. GPUs pools give us a way to at least let them know that they're there. So when we do a failover, that on the target system, it knows to fire up and map the GPU inside of there. But that's on an HA event. So HA, we've got GPU pools. All right. Switching gears now, also for Hyper-V. is a feature I really, really like, dynamic processor compatibility. Um, this is actually a very important feature. Generally, what we see happens is someone will say, look, I bought a bunch of servers, I bought a cluster, I have, third generation Intel Xeon Scalable. I go to my vendor, a year later, year and a half later, 2 years later. Guess what? I bought a 4 node cluster. I really wish this was a 7 node cluster. I need a little bit more capacity and capability. But the vendor goes, I'm sorry, I don't sell that server anymore. I do have the 4th generation Intel Xeon Scalable, or whatever, but I don't have the 3rd anymore. Well, what this means is mixing and matching, hardware, it can be a challenge. You want compatibility and you want performance. Well, with dynamic processor compatibility, you're covered. The way it works is this: when you turn on your cluster, so you have a 3rd gen and a 4th gen together. These servers are in the same cluster. When you turn on the cluster, failover clustering and Hyper-V, they actually look at all of the nodes in the cluster and they go, oh, these first few nodes have 3rd gen and these next few nodes have 4th gen. So I want to make sure that I can live migrate between any node in the cluster. Okay, that's the most important thing. I want to be able to do HA and live migration, but I want to get the maximum performance. So what ends up happening is Hyper-V will set the virtual processor inside of those virtual machines to give you the maximum compatibility with the maximum performance. So we will take advantage of the full amount of features that are available across all of the nodes in the system. Now, if the cluster is all 3rd gen or all 4th gen, well, then you're just going to get all the features. But if you have a mixed cluster, it will automatically interrogate and figure out what's the best settings for you and automatically do it for you. This is automatic and it's transparent. There's nothing you need to do to set. It just happens. It's kind of like magic. Next, I also want to point out a critical feature to me that means a lot to me, and it's been around for a very, very long time, which is Generation 2 virtual machines. I'm always surprised at how many people are, and it's probably our fault as well, so I'm going to take some blame here. But when you create a virtual machine in Hyper-V, by default, we use Generation 1. And we've had Generation 2 virtual machines since 2012. That's right, 2012. And the reason why we had Generation 1 virtual machines, just as a quick reminder, is way back when we invented Hyper-V, when we were developing it, way back in the 2008 days, we needed to support some pretty old operating systems like Windows 2000, 2003. And so we needed older systems with traditional BIOSes and traditional looking virtual components. If you look at Generation 2 virtual machines, you get a lot of advantages. You get better security, you get better performance, you get better capability, but most importantly, all of the OSs that we support in Hyper-V all support Generation 2. So one of the things we're doing is we are defaulting to Generation 2. So number one, you get a better performance. You can have a virtual machine with up to 240 virtual processors versus 64. This may not sound like a big deal, but trust me, I've run into a few customers that said, hey, I was setting up my mission critical SQL, and guess what? I can only create a virtual machine with 64. And the first thing I say is, oh, you created a Gen 1 VM. What? Yeah. So Generation 2 will be the new default. You get up to 240 virtual processors. You get better security with Secure Boot and a TPM. You get UEFI firmware instead of an old legacy BIOS. And you also get dynamic features like hot add and remove, like hot add and remove NICs, for example. So the GUIs will default to Generation 2. Azure Marketplace images are going to be Generation 2. Just want to let you know it's a great change. I'm excited it's happening. I've been creating all my VMs with Gen 2 VMs for 10 plus years. So, but I just kind of mentally just did it. So I'm excited that we're making this change. And I urge you that if you are creating any new virtual machines today on Hyper-V, even if you're on 2016 or 2019, for example, make sure you're doing it. Create them with Gen 2 VMs. All right. I know I'm starting to run low on time, so I'm going to make a quick jump up here and switch on over to file services. So I mentioned earlier our top request. Top request was hot patching by a country mile, by the way. It's not even close. Everybody, ever since we've released hot patching, has been begging for that. So I'm excited we're delivering ARC-enabled hot patching in Windows Server vNext. One other feature that I would put very much in the same category is some work that we did with Windows Server Azure Edition and next generation file services, specifically SMB over QUIC. SMB over QUIC is a game-changing feature. Our mobile sales team can securely access corporate file servers without a VPN. We need this technology at the edge and in other clouds. And so I'm excited to announce that we are delivering SMB over QUIC in Windows Server v.next. And it's in standard, it's in data center, and it's in Azure Edition. Okay, this feature is in Windows Server vNext Insiders now. This is available right now. So please, you should take a look and you should start checking it out. If you want, there's also a blog post that's available at aka.ms/SMB over QUIC server. Again, that's aka.ms/SMB over QUIC server. So what this means is you're going to get the benefits of QUIC, and you're going to get those on Windows Server vNext Standard, Data Center, and Azure Edition, which means you can securely access your corporate file servers, even if you're sitting at the local coffee shop and you're just doing it over the internet. Why? Because QUIC uses a TLS 1.3 encrypted tunnel. Essentially, you're using a VPN tunnel without having to enable VPN. It's like magic. But it's not just enabling a feature that we had in 2022, we're also adding new features as well. So Windows Server v.next includes SMB over QUIC client access control. So you can now provide for trusted clients, not just a trusted server. It increases the difficulty by adding another layer of security. And so there's new features that have got into SMB over QUIC, for example, that we don't have in Windows Server 2022 Azure Edition. So big enhancements there. And then there's SMB just in general. SMB is, a protocol that everybody's using everywhere. It's pretty ubiquitous. And so with SMB NTLM disable option, we are working to, again, harden the platform, harden SMB, harden the protocols. So number one, we want to stop emitting NTLM secrets. We want remote NTLM only. And you can control this with PowerShell, with group policy, yes, with group policy, and mapping tools. So SMB NTLM disable option so that you're no longer using NTLM for SMB. And then lastly, because I know I'm about to run out of time, but I have to get to this one, is from a security perspective, we need to talk about brute force attacks. So if you look at how the bad guys are attacking everywhere, quite honestly, around the world, a brute force attack is basically, it's a type of cyber attack where they're guessing passwords, encryption keys, or other sensitive information by trial and error. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's simple brute force attacks, there's dictionary attacks, there's hybrid brute force attacks, there's just a ton of different ways to do it. But at the end of the day, it's about, I'm going to keep jamming in credentials or tokens or password, anything I can to break into it. And these are old. I mean, script kiddies have been doing this for decades, but they're effective, which is why they keep doing it. So we've come up with a great way to actually help prevent this with SMB. In Windows Server v.next, we're introducing the SMB authentication rate limiter. You can think of this as brute force attack prevention. So we're going to throttle bad NTLM passwords. So you type in a bad password, you type in a wrong password, and we're going to introduce a 2-second delay between each fail, and that's the default setting. This is on by default in Windows Server and Windows Client, and you can control this with PowerShell. Let me show you what this means in terms of its effectiveness. So here's a test we ran. We did over 300 brute force attempts per second for 5 minutes. That's 90,000 password attacks. Well, that now takes 50 hours. That's right. It now takes 50 hours to do the same types of test. That's a big change with a very scoped and surgical change that we're making in Windows Server v.next. I think this is a great enhancement. It's a great way to help prevent against brute force attacks, which we know continue to be an easy target for the bad guys out there, and I'm very excited by what we're doing there. I'm about to hit my hard limit. I'm about to run out of time. Like I said earlier with Karsten, um, there is a ton in Windows Server vNext, and I've really only scratched the surface. There's a bunch of work in containers. There's a bunch of work in networking. There's a bunch of work in group policy. There's a bunch of work in upgrades. And there's a bunch of work we've done in the Windows Server experience. What I would lastly like to ask everyone is, I've mentioned this a few times, but if you haven't, please download Windows Server vNext from the Windows Insider program and join the Windows Insider program. This is where we communicate as new features come out. Like I mentioned, there's a bunch of features that are already in right now that you can start to take advantage of. And there are more features that are coming out. We release every couple weeks, we release a new Windows Insider build, and you'll see what features are coming out. And we would love to get your feedback. Or there's a new desktop experience. Didn't get a chance to talk about that today. Do you like the new desktop experience? Do your applications and that you have, do they just work? They should. Do your VMs run as expected? Are you seeing, the new features and new capabilities? Are you trying out SMB over quick and so much more? So I want to thank Karsten. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate the time. We've got an exciting 2024 on tap, and we've got a huge laundry list of features and capabilities coming from Microsoft, whether it's Azure, whether it's Azure Stack, whether it's Windows Server, whether it's hybrid. You're going to see us making investments all across the board. Karsten, back to
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for the presentation. I promised you you can go at your time limit. That's now. Maybe we can redo that when new features are available. We had a lot of questions. We hadn't have the time, but the presentation was really great, and a lot of new stuff is coming. Thanks everybody to join. Thank you, Jeff. We see each other in Redmond, I think, in March. Looking forward to that. Bye bye.